everybody. We are honored today to receive our friend and partner, Mr. Ambassador Luigi Narbon, Director of the Middle East Direction Program and Coordinator of the Peace and Security Cluster School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute, and also to receive my colleague Mohamedou Lee, Senior Economist, Policy Center for the New South. Let me before present and introduce the PCNS. The Policy Center for the New South is a Moroccan think tank aiming to contribute to the improvement of economic and social public policies that challenge Morocco and the rest of Africa as an integral part of the global South. The PCNS pleads for an open, accountable, and enterprising New South that defines its own narratives and mental maps around the Mediterranean and South Atlantic Basin as part of forward-looking relationship with the rest of the world. Through its analytical endeavor, the think tank aims to support the development of public policies in Africa and to give the floor to experts from the South and also from the North. This stance is focused on dialogue and partnership and aims to cultivate African expertise and excellence needed for the accurate analysis of African and global challenges and the suggestion of appropriate solution. As such, the PCNS brings together researchers, publishers, their work, and capitalizes on a network of renowned partners, representatives of different regions in the world. The PCNS hosts a series of gathering of different formats and scales through the year, the most important being the annual international conference, the Atlantic Dialogue, and the African Peace and Security Annual Conference, APSACO. APSACO, we organize it in Rabat, and Atlantic Dialogue in Marrakesh. Finally, the think tank is developing a community of young leaders through the Atlantic Dialogues Emerging Leaders Program, a space for cooperation, networking between a new generation of decision makers from the government, businesses, and civil society sectors. Through this initiative, which already counts more than 300 members, the Policy Center for the New South contributes to intergenerational dialogue and the emergence of tomorrow's leader. Now, I ask Mr. Ambassador also to introduce his institution and to know more well about your work.
Thank you very much. Thank you also to the Policy Center for the New South for hosting us as we start a good cooperation on a number of substantive issues in terms of joint research and initiatives. Just a few words to introduce my program. The Med Directions program is in existence since 2015, is part of the research department of the European University Institute, the Schumann Center for Advanced Studies, and basically try to focus on the main issues that affect Middle East and North Africa, particularly in this time of turmoil. We have been developing three main research axes. One is on the political and socio-economic transformations that are taking place in the region. Secondly, we are looking at the specific dynamics of conflict zones and conflict countries, and particularly we've been quite active in research programs on Libya and Syria. And thirdly, we have a strong program on the political economy of the region. We have been very much interested in issues such as stabilization and reconstruction in conflict countries, but also longer-term questions of development and regional integration, for instance, as a way out of the crisis. The program is, as I said, is an important component of the research platform in the UI, but we also believe that it's very important to focus on policy relevant research. So I think that's the topic of today, and we will certainly develop in our conversation later.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Well, let me ask you, both of you, just a general question. In this turmoil space and time that we are living, principally in Mediterranean area and in Africa generally, and also in all the Middle East, what role for the think tank?
Think tanks play an important role. There is very much a demand from policymakers and practitioners in both sides of both the shores of the Mediterranean to better understand the dynamics and the trends that affect the region. The old paradigms through which we were reading the developments in MENA countries and in Africa, I think they fail to grasp the dimension of transformation and changes. They certainly have failed to anticipate the current crisis in MENA, for instance, and they do not necessarily very helpful in thinking about solutions to the current problems. So think tanks play an important role in supporting policymaking. They are important in order to translate research in evidence-based policy support that can be used when shaping policies. I think the demand is never been as big as today, and it's the task of think tanks and research institutions in academia with a vocation for policy relevance, really to shape and prepare research that can be used when designing policies. So that is an important role, I believe.
Okay. Thank you very much, Khalid, for this invitation. For regarding the think tanks, especially in the context of developing countries, in African countries, what we have to know that is, if we go back to history, we see that we used to have in developing countries, in African countries at the time, a Ministry of Planning. Those ministries has disappeared in all countries now, if you look at. So what we see now in African countries is just governments, public authorities managing on a day-to-day basis. So this is a real problem, because we end up having public authorities, what we call that are between what we could say let it be behavior, in reference to the Beetle tube, meaning that we just observe the situation, we do what we can do, what we cannot do, people just manage it by themselves. On the other side, or they can have a fireman attitude, meaning that they wait the situation to happen. At that time, they come to stop the fire. So I think this is the role for think tanks, especially in this period of turmoil. We have rising populism in Europe. The civil society in African countries, from Caire to Cairo to Cap, is very dynamic. We see it in Senegal, everywhere, where youth are demanding in terms of equality, development, etc. So think tanks are, to my sense, the only institution that have the opportunity to have time to run their analysis. Government are in emergency. In French, we used to say dictature des urgences. Our government are under dictatorship of emergency. So think tanks give the opportunity with their research, their skilled staff, to run reflection thinkings for solution in the long term. So this is what I see think tanks could, the answer they are already bringing to the debate in the context of African countries especially, and more broadly in developing countries.
Yeah, in link with Africa, we notice that, and this is our point of view in Africa, we believe that it's not true. We believe that it cannot be really true, but this is the reality that we notice, that Europe, as a historical partner of African country, is in retreat or in regression in some way. When the continent becomes a space of rivalries, there is a new player coming to Africa from Asia, from Middle East. Can think tank make proposal? First of all, are you agree with me about this idea? And can think tank make some proposal in order to balance this situation between our historical partner in Africa and the new and emerging partner?
Well, I would challenge your statement that the Europe is withdrawing from Africa. What is happening indeed is the fact that the new players are coming in, and they are adopting, of course, a different type of approach to the problems of development, often led by also interest in, for instance, exploiting natural resources or the trade and growth potential of the African continent. Europe remains as an important partner. I mean, has been accompanying African development for a long time. It has been, I think, trying to facilitate processes of integration of the African continent at the regional and the continental level. The new African continental free trade agreement process that is starting is being supported strongly by the EU and also the African Union as an organization that fosters cooperation in the continent. Other actors are coming in with different types of approaches and different types of projects, perhaps less supportive of reforms processes, and then sometimes they are, of course, very welcome by some of the players in Africa. But as you say, there is increased rivalry and increased competition, increased difference in visions, how you foster development, how you assist countries in moving upward in the development process. I think think tanks and research organizations can play a very important role. I think those processes that are of an importance historical, they need to be based on good analysis and good research. Not only that, I think the policy making needs evidence. They needs a good analysis grounded, scientific analysis grounded on in-depth research. And think tanks can help translating the results of research into recommendations and suggestions for policy making for the future. I mean, we are in a situation where there is absolutely a new need to invent future. Perhaps past recipes and past mechanisms do not seem to work anymore, and certainly are challenged by the different visions. So we need to come to a common ground through solid evidence-based policy analysis. And that is the role of think tanks. I think this facilitate this process of reflection about the future and help policymakers in making solid and grounded decisions for the future of the continent.
Yeah, for you, Mohamed Ali, as senior economist, the same question, but principally focusing on geo-economic area, because this rivalry also, it's not only politics, but it's lot of economy, lot of research, lot of oil, lot of gas, and lot of rivalry about market in Africa.
Yes. So yes, I do agree with you with your statement saying that there is rivalries, tension, etc. But the first answer I can give to that is to say that the human being, it's normal for the human being. When we don't understand a situation, we get afraid by the situation. Regarding, for example, the ongoing, to stress the role of think tanks on that specific issue, if we look at the ongoing research here in the PCNS or somewhere else, we're just showing that there is no reason to have these threats, these turmoil, etc. There is no reason. It's a normal processes that African countries start to trade or exchange more with new rising economies, Turkey, China, etc., etc. It's a normal process. And once we know that it's a normal process, it's kind of calm the game. It gives some less patience to the debate, because what is happening, what our research show, is that it's a normal situation. Europe is in another step of their development. For African countries, for example, it makes more and more better sense to exchange with China, Bangladesh, etc., because what they need for their development in terms of sophisticated materials, etc., this is where they can find it. And those countries, they found it in Europe, in America, 30, 40 years ago. So it's a normal process. Our contribution as think tanks will be, or would be, to show to all the actors that there is a way to exchange, to discuss with each one of them. Europe should not be in a position like considering Africa changing to Asia. No. The nature of the relation need to be changed, but relation will remain. So this is the contribution think tanks are making. We are making it here. Other think tanks are making it to depassionate the debate based on scientific arguments. We use scientific tools, econometrics, statistics, etc., and we arrive at this conclusion. And once we say it, when we travel to Europe, to Africa, people they get more relaxed when they know that it's natural.
Yeah, Mr. Ambassador, you talk about the new age of public policies that need more reflection, more ideas, and more paradigm, and the new. It's a very new need. How can a think tank help in that way the decision makers to make a new this new age in a very better way?
I think the role is once again very important. There is never like now there has been a need for platforms for discussions, for the scientific community to come together, for the practitioners and policymakers community to come together, try to understand. Think tanks can help in gathering the analysis, also making sure that issues are looked in a scientific way, but also in a multidisciplinary way. Complexity of the reality today requires interdisciplinary analysis. I think responses need to look at different angles, and the space of debate is essential. And I think think tank can play that role, and making sure that the results are disseminated, perhaps going out of the shelves of the libraries of universities and reaching into the general public opinion, the specific public sector management that needs to make decisions. And this communication needs to be fluid, and only think tank can play the role. I mean, as I totally agree, Mohammed, whoever is in government and in public policy is always trapped by continuous emergencies and needs to respond to ever evolving needs. There is often the lack of capacity to think strategically because of the immediacy of the emergencies. Right. And the space for assisting in strategy making is through think tanks, a sort of a platform that combines research with policy making needs, I believe.
Mohamedou, I think that there is a very old tradition in Europe by decision makers. There is a tradition to hearing, to learn from think tanks. In Africa, I think it's a new practice, and there is also some difference between Anglophone area and Francophone area. I don't know about Arabophone area, but also Arabophone area are in both of those two systems, Anglophone or Francophone. What do you think about the impact and this new generation of government in Africa and this new area of democracy in some country in Africa? Because there is something very positive in Africa. We must be agree with that and suppose that there is a very good progression and development of democracy in Africa. Can think tanks in Africa, in all of the continent, can have impact in policy makers or public policy in Africa principally?
Exactly. This is a very important and very broad question. It leads me to ask myself one question, which is related to the challenge think tanks face in Africa. They face mainly, like in other regions in the world, three challenges. One is what you're saying is how to be heard and influence policies. This is a big issue. The second challenge is political pressure. The third challenge is funding. How could they be funded? To come to the political pressure, we cannot neglect it. It does exist. But how to overcome this problem? I think, to my point of view and the little experience I have across the continent, is that this political pressure comes from for political leaders not knowing the role of think tanks. Think tanks are not political parties. Think tanks are not activist organizations. Think tanks are not just heterodox space, etc. No, or junkie organization. No, it's far from that. It's institutions permanently settled in the country, having staffed by skilled analysis and aimed at giving policy recommendations for the authorities. So now we need to, when we have this definition, we need to adapt it to our context. How can we make our think tanks operational and far from political pressure? If we look at, just for example, to China, they have think tanks that are heard, that have a real impact. And some of them are even inside some ministries, but they have impact. So we need to find the right balance, showing the public authority that we are partners in terms of development strategy. For example, what the balance we could find with them is sometimes when we run some research, it's not in their interest. They might dislike it. They might say that you're doing this research, you putting it on the public place, and after we're having social turmoil in the country. So we have think tankers. Should we publish all our studies, or should we have some studies just we sharing with the policymakers. Look, we did this research, we find this, it's a threat or an opportunity, we give it to you, and this is our recommendation. What do we do? I think that for some of our research, things can be done on this way. And now, how to be heard? The second thing related to your question, how to be heard. This is very difficult because all the regimes in the world, they last maximum 7 years. After it change. So during the 7 years, if I want a second term, I need to do some flashy actions. And think tanks, they are in a prospective approach. What will be the country in 30 years, 50 years, 2 centuries? In 2 centuries, the government will say, in 2 centuries, I won't be here. I need real actions now. So on that point, think tanks need to be strategic, have 2 axes of action. First, I propose to the government short-term actions. I did some research regarding, for example, trade between Morocco and Europe. This is what you can do in the coming 2 or 3 years. But after that, I present you another report. Look, Mr. Prime Minister, this is a long-term strategy. Why we propose you that? Because we think tankers are trans-regime organization. You will leave, we will be here. Your successor will come, leave, he will leave us here. So this is a kind of balance think tanks should find. Play with the short term and long term, giving a kind of sweetie thing to the government to give to the people in the short term, but developing strategies in the long term. For the political pressure, for sensitive things, sensitive results, we could agree not to perhaps to publish it or communicate on it, but find other ways to make it more effective.
Yeah, in that way, I think that we must also make very good strategy and very good policy of communication,
right?
To be more heard and not all the time saying that we are suffering, that others doesn't heard about us or doesn't learn about that. This is it's more practical in Africa. I think in Europe it's we are in a different situation. Well. We talk a lot about think tank, their production, if it is for the public, for the government, with the relation, it's normal between decision makers and think tank. But what about think tank themselves? What about networking between think tank? And that's why you are here now in the PCNS. How we can develop strategy of networking between academia institution and think tank, between think tank themselves and also between academia and the researcher themselves, to be more benefits for public policy.
Well, networking is clearly the key for having a rigorous research today. Most of the projects have a dimension that requires tapping on multiple expertise, tapping on perhaps research that is carried out elsewhere in academia, as you say, more fundamental research or applied research, looking at ways of translating this into a more policy relevant products, as we said. Networking is the way of operating to maintain also the independence of the research. I mean, to avoid the political pressures building up, or perhaps even through funding, there's a sort of independence that may lead to product of think tanks that accommodate certain political interest instead of promoting longer term development objectives. So networking is the key. I mean, in Europe is very much the name of the game of research and the activities of those research institutions that have a policy objective. I think this networking capacity needs to be extended, certainly across the Mediterranean, throughout Africa. It helps also upgrading the capacity of think tanks, making sure that they are capable of producing at the same levels, international standards that make the production solid and scientific. And I think it's also can be helpful for addressing funding issues, and that is certainly an element that needs further exploration and exploitation, I would say.
Yes, I will say that networking and building strong networks and platform of think tanks is vital. Is a matter of life for think tanks, for at least four reasons. The first reason is just to give the example. We cannot say that we are here to promote good practices, good public policies, etc., and not being able to discuss between us. So this is the first thing we need to give, to be credible, give the good example. The second reason is when you look at all think tanks in the world now, not just Africa, we face the same problem. You have the Gilets jaunes in France, you have something else in other countries. Our youth in our countries, they face the same problem. They have Facebook, they have etc. I don't want to do publicity for those, but they have all the electronic stuff and digital. So what is happening now in France, at the same time, the Moroccan youth, the Senegalese youth is aware of that, and he wants the same thing. So we face the same social problems. So we need to find a proper platform to discuss those things. And another argument for us to discuss between ourselves is to kind of, I would say, harmonize our tools. We face the same social problems. We need to have the same definition of those problems. What does employment means in Africa, for example? Think tanks of Africa should answer this question. What employment means in Africa? What is behind all the social movement we're facing, etc. And also harmonize our tools. What are the tools we're using? We need to, if we want to speak the same language at this one point of time, we need to have the same tools. Generally, but of course, in each country, it could be adapted. But these are the key things I see that makes vital for think tanks to discuss between themselves.
Yeah, I have a last question, because and I think that we can benefit about your experience in Europe. How can a national think tank deal with their European appartenance too? Because we can find national think tank in Europe, in country, more linked into their government, to their own interest, to their own agenda, and looks like a global think tank means more linked into the European Union. How we can link between, because those two agendas still exist until now in Europe, and there is some contradiction sometimes, and we in Africa, we feel that, I don't know if it is true or not, but we feel that there is sometimes some contradiction between some local agenda, national agenda, and the European Union agenda. And how can the think tank deal with that? And how can they make proposal to go outside this dilemma?
Well, the dilemma is inevitable because the complexity of the world we live today. There are multiple agendas, multiple levels of analysis and reflection, and the way out of this is to increase the connectivity between the researcher community, the think tanks, making sure that there is sufficient space for exchanges and that increases the understanding and perhaps leads to joint projects. Joint projects are the way to somehow combine the two types of visions and try to arrive to a common approach. After all, many of the issues that we have to deal with are very much linked to our growing interdependence. Even in Europe, it's very difficult to focus only on internal issues, and it's less and less possible to disconnect them for the external dimension. And we live in a moment, in a reality where what happens in the MENA region affects directly, talking about migration, or talking about securities, or talking about economic and energy issues. The interconnection between issues is there. And I think think tanks cooperation, university cooperation can help in addressing issues in a common way, finding the solutions that are challenging, that have this transnational dimension, and finding them together and based on solid research that has somehow combines the various agendas.
Yeah, same question for you, Mohamedou. And here in PCNS, even though we are installed in Morocco, in Rabat, but we want, we hope, and we desire to think as African more than Moroccan. Yes, Morocco is very important for us, but also Senegal, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, South Africa, all the continent is more interesting for us. In a few minutes, what can you say about that?
Yes, I will say that it's very important because Morocco has its roots in Africa. All African countries, all of them, without no exception, coming from the roots, decided to go toward more integration. But if we decided to go more integration, we have to bear in mind that we have past experiences that with some of them that didn't succeed. If we go back in the history, we have the Fédération du Mali, Fédération Sénégambie, the Yuma region, etc., where we should find lessons to succeed. In the future, I think that there is a big challenge, big role to play by think tanks. We are, for example, here working a lot on that, on how mechanically this integration, how it could be articulated, taking into account the past, the history, and also the interest of each country. Because for example, we're studying here the issue of Zuleika. We have run a lot of studies on that, but we see that not all countries have the same interest on that. Our job as think tanks is to find ways to harmonize all the interests and come with clear proposition to policy makers. Our objective in fine is for the continent as a whole to develop, to reach social and economic development, but not only, but also a continent open to other spaces, open to Europe. We're calling more openness to Europe, more openness to America, but also more openness to the new world, but from the southern perspective. The South, he gives his hand to all the region. So our objective is to come with a document or a lot of documents with policy recommendations that are implementable for policymakers in that objective.
Yes, we arrived to the end of this podcast. I want to say thank you, Mr. Ambassador Luigi Narboni, for your presence and for your discussion and helping us to discuss more well and to show how think tank is very important, not only for decision maker, but also for all our society and all our country. Thank you, dear colleague Mohamedou Lee, senior economist in Policy Center. Thank you for the technical team of PCNS and logistic team of PCNS. Thank you to the PCNS for hosting us for this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.